I'm wrapping up my reading list for February of 2020, and if you've watched any of the other videos in this series, then you know that I am on a quest to read in order the Armand Gamache series by Louise Penny. And this month, the bulk of my reading was Louise Penny books. So I like to say at the outset, here be spoilers, and this is no different. So I am going to discuss some of the conclusions. I'll try not to give everything away if you haven't read them. I'm not somebody who usually is put off books by knowing what happens. I've been known to read ahead just so that the suspense is not killing me. So, but if you are different, you may not want to listen to all of these. So it's up to you. But the first book that I read in February, the first book that I finished was Bury Your Dead, and it was a Louise Penny book. It's number 6 in the Chief Inspector Armand Gamache series. And 6 books in, we cover a lot of the similar ground that is covered in some of the other books. And yet, when I'm reaching the end of the book, I still hustle to the library to get the next one in the series. In this particular installment of the series, we find our beloved Armand recovering from a tragedy. And you don't know all the details as the book unfolds. You're kind of putting things together. Something awful has happened, and Armand is actually in Quebec City, and he's recovering from whatever this incident was. His second-in-command, John Guy, is also trying to recover from the series, and from a distance, Armand is trying to help him as well. I don't love the books as much when they're not set in Three Pines, and this wasn't that different in that. I mean, I guess that held true for me in this book as well. This book, Goodreads readers gave it an average of 4.35 at the time of me filming this, or earlier today when I was looking up what the ratings were. And I wouldn't give it quite that high for me personally. Maybe a high 3, close to 4, but I don't think it's not one of my favorites. Anyway, as sort of the story unfolds, you're learning in bits and pieces sort of what the details of the tragedy were. You find out that a character we came to care for earlier in this series has met their demise. And it's sort of set around a mystery, a historical mystery, where the details of and the burial place of one of the founders, an important figure in Canadian history. At a distance, our beloved Three Pines is still waiting for the return of Olivier, who in the previous book had been jailed for the murder of the Hermit. That is a spoiler if you didn't read that particular book. But Gabri, Olivier's partner, has never given up hope and belief in Olivier. He feels he's been unjustly convicted, and he is writing Armand every day to plead and the innocence of Olivier. So in an effort to kind of follow up on that, and in an effort to kind of, I think, give Jean-Guy some purpose, Armand sends him to Three Pines to kind of snoop around. And Jean-Guy, as always, is kind of the foil to Armand and is innately suspicious, much more so than Armand is. So he initially doesn't think there's a chance that Olivier could be innocent. So it's sort of 2 mysteries for the price of 1 this time. And actually the one in Three Pines is a lot more interesting to me than the one that's unfolding in Quebec City. So like I said, not my favorite in the series, but it was worth was worth a read. It was enjoyable for sure. The next book that I read in February, also an Inspector Armand Gamache series, is the next one, and it's called A Trick of the Light. It has right around the same rating according to Goodreads readers. It's a 4.31 as opposed to a 4.35. And this one is a good one. It is set in Three Pines. Kind of the foreword for it was really touching to me. In it, Louise Penny inscribes or dedicates the book to her husband, Michael. And she says, "This is for my husband, Michael, who has created a life for us full of love and kindness. He allowed me to quit my job, pretend to write, then gave me unstinting praise. Even when what I produced was drivel, I realized that anyone can be a critic, but it takes a remarkable person to offer praise. Michael is that person." So in some context for that, just knowing some of the biography of the author, she has said that she used her husband Michael as the basis for Armand. And I know that her husband passed away in 2005. He was apparently a remarkable doctor, and he had, I could tear up at this, he had dementia in the later years of his life, and Louise took care of him. And I just think that's really beautiful. And you know, reading the books, you come to love Armand and think of him. I mean, he's one of the driving factors in, if you love the books, you love him. He's sort of a model of a ideal gentleman husband. He would be my senior, but or a father figure. He's all that's good and honorable. So to know that her husband is the model for that, he must have been a remarkable person as well. So anyway, just that inscription really was touching to me. But as for the story itself, this one takes place, as I said, in Three Pines, and we find a dead woman from Clara Morrow's past is found by Clara in the garden of her home on the day after what should have been a really amazing day for her, because she's had her big art show, and we kind of see our cast of characters that we're all familiar with kind of go through all of this. So we learn in this book about some of the really complex emotions and history at play between Clara and Peter. Some of that's been shown in earlier books, but you know, you see kind of an underlying theme of forgiveness, or the concept of forgiveness at least, in there with regard to Olivier and Ruth. Spoiler, I guess, there, that Olivier is back in Three Pines between Olivier and Armand as the person who, you know, was instrumental in getting him arrested and convicted, and then also released. And then Clara and Peter, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's sort of a cliffhanger at the end with regard to the two of those. Okay, and then the next book that I read was actually not an Armand Gamache book. It was The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. And this is sort of a controversial book. I've heard a lot of different opinions. If you look at the Goodreads reviews, it's kind of all over the map. There's so many positive reviews, but there also are a lot of very disappointed reviews. And it makes sense. It's really hard to surpass a book like The Handmaid's Tale. I know personally, one of my favorite books ever is To Kill a Mockingbird, and I love that book so much that I wouldn't read the follow-up book because I didn't want to hurt my relationship with that first book. So I get where people are coming from it's hard once you have such an iconic book, especially after the popularity of the television series. I mean, I think that's kind of distorted people's view of the original book as well. And I get some of the reviews talking about the tonal difference between the two books. I think the tone of The Handmaid's Tale, and it's kind of hard to talk about the Testaments without bringing in The Handmaid's Tale. There is such a somber, almost desperate, hopeless even feeling, like the everything with Atwood in the first book is about survival, and it really takes you to a place where you have to imagine yourself in the society of Gilead and what you might do in order just to survive. So I can see if that's what you were anticipating, and maybe I didn't go in with a lot of expectations, so I was able to just kind of cut loose and enjoy the book, because the tone in the Testaments is very different. It's told through a device of using 3 different narrators. One, a girl who was raised in Gilead, who was a believer. One who is the familiar Aunt Lydia, who you'll recognize from the series, from the original book. And one is, and I don't want to give it all away and totally spoil it, but is a girl who was raised on the outside of Gilead, so sort of a modern counterpart. And it's told from those unique perspectives. 2 of those voices are teenage girls. So I think it's natural that the tone be very different, just in relation to those 2 young voices who are in there. You definitely get to see a different side of Aunt Lydia, and I would argue that her portion of the book is the most compelling kind of testament, to kind of hear her backstory, her inner workings. There's kind of a surprise twist as to the role that she's playing within the story. And honestly, I was entranced by this story. I enjoyed it very much. I stayed up late reading it. I was hungry for more when it ended. It ended too soon for me. I feel like the tone, because of the age of the narrators, made sense to me. I also feel like because of the timing, because clearly it's after the fact, when, again, it's almost an anthropological or sociological study where it's looking at events in the past. So clearly, Gilead has toppled, and at the time of the story, it's close. At least I took the implication that it was close to the toppling of Gilead. So I wish I knew more. I would like the explicit, every last detail of how did the toppling of Gilead occur? What was the catalyst? Could the scandal that's sort of alluded to in the book was that what the undoing of Gilead was? Are there factions of Gilead? Were there factions of Gilead holdouts after the fact? So to me, there's still room for more. And I know Margaret Atwood is, I believe, in 80 or in that age range. So I don't know the likelihood of that. But I would love to know more. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really compelling book. And I'm impressed that someone of her age wrote so clearly of the feelings of the different age range of characters. I thought it was very believable. So, the next book that I read is one that I covered for work. And at my workplace, I do a professional development series in learning and development. And one of the ones I covered in the past month was the book by Seth Godin called Are You a Linchpin? And I really admire Seth Godin. I follow his blog. This is Seth's blog. I love his podcast, Akimbo. And I actually read Linchpin some years ago when I was a professional development trainer. So when I was I had a positive association with it, so I decided to revisit it for the series I've been doing. And this is a different type of professional development or self-development book than sort of your run-of-the-mill fare, largely I think because it doesn't really give a lot of concrete, like step 1 do this, step 2 do that type of advice. And I think because of that, it doesn't rate as highly with a lot of readers. I think it had a 3.84 according to Goodreads as some of Seth's other books, and he's a very prolific writer. He says himself in the book that being indispensable, and the book's full title is Linchpin, Are You Indispensable? That being indispensable, being a linchpin, is not really something that other people can tell you how to do, as each situation is different, and being a linchpin is really about figuring out how to do that. But in terms of concepts, it's about bringing your best self, your whole self to work. And if you think about it, many of us kind of have like a work persona and a personal life persona. I know I thought, kind of as I started in my career, I just assumed that's kind of what everyone did. You had the person you were at work, and then you had kind of your truer self or your fuller self that you engaged in being when you were outside of work. And the concept that Seth is positing is that you really want to do the emotional labor of bringing your whole self to work. It's our humor, our humanity, our care, our rapport with others, intelligence, discernment, all of these things. You don't want to kind of hold yourself back while you're at work, or hold those parts aloof. And as I was kind of reading this book in the context of sort of, the dialogue you hear about shame and vulnerability, in post-Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, it's a lot of those concepts. This book predates that, and maybe doesn't use all the same vocabulary, but there are a lot of the same concepts there, about putting yourself out there, distinguishing yourself by being willing to try things, connecting with people, and not worrying so much about results as process. So in general terms, Seth Godin talks about how we can dare greatly, or how we can be indistinguishable. There are 5 elements of personality that are essential to how people look at us that we should think about. These are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, emotional stability, and several skills to develop. Openness is one of them, which I think is cheating, but engagement, rapport, intellect, and charisma. So those qualities and skills are ones that stand out and build connections between people. So if you feel like you need to nurture any of those qualities, what he recommends is to look for experiences to build them. And he says every interaction is an opportunity to do so and to practice those qualities. And a great way to do that, an opportunity to learn, is to look for problems that's caused others to quit. So where can you find, as Seth says, trouble that gives a chance to delight? So this really applies to every time you interact with a customer, whether it's an internal customer, so a peer within your company or organization, or an outside customer. So I really enjoyed that he talked about the effort that you bring to this being really part of what can take even the most mundane task or job and elevate it and make it art. So I think it's kind of a really beautiful idea. It rang true to me, and I sort of was able to match the things that it was describing with the people that have been mentors to me in my life, or that have made the biggest connections with me throughout my working life. So I liked the book. I would recommend it. It's probably, yeah, I thought it was good. I do get what some other reviews were saying in terms of the repetitive nature of it and the lack of maybe concreteness with it. Maybe didn't appeal to everyone. I get it. I still liked it. The next book that I read was StillLife by Louise, which is #1 in the Armand Gamache series. And I know this violates my desire to read these in order. I have read this book previously, but I don't know if it ever happens to you that you're getting ready to maybe loan someone a book and you just start paging through it and maybe kind of reacquainting yourself so you can chat with them about it. And then you look up and you realize you just reread like half the book. Well, might as well keep going at that point. So at least that was my thought with this read. This is the book that kicks off the series. And I have to say, again, it's not my favorite. Goodreads gives it a 3.88. It won some mystery writer awards right out of the gate, as many of Louise Penny's books have. But I think it's the reason that I didn't start like immediately just reading the books in order. I liked it enough that I would pick up one of the books if I saw it at a library book sale or a thrift store, someplace inexpensively, or if I was traveling and wanted something kind of nice and reassuring to read. But I didn't find it compelling enough that like I wanted to rush out and read the series. But to get specific about the book, you're introduced to the major characters in the book in this series. What initially brings everyone to Three Pines, Inspector Gamache, Jean Guy. You're introduced to Agent Nicole, is a murder of someone close to Clara and Peter Morrow. So in the book, I think it's good enough that it keeps you guessing. It's not quite as much of a difficult to figure out who did it as maybe some of the other books, but it's not bad. You are introduced to some of the beautiful writing that Louise Penny that characterizes these books. One of my favorite quotes from the book is, "Life is a choice, all day, every day, who we talk to, where we sit, what we say, how we say it, and our lives become defined by our choices. It's as simple and as complex as that, and as powerful. So when I'm observing, that's what I'm watching for, the choices people make." And I think I wrote that down when I read it. I thought it was a really powerful quote and a really interesting observation in the book. So the last book that I read for the month of February was number 8 in Louise Penny's series. It's called The Beautiful Mystery. And as I'm rereading the series, again, I'm just realizing I don't love the ones that aren't in Three Pines as much, and this one is not in Three Pines. So in this one we find Armand and Jean Guy traveling to a mysterious Canadian monastery to investigate the murder of the prior of the monastery that must have been committed by one of his only 20 or so brethren that are in this locked-in, very remote community. Honestly, this one, there were definite elements that I did not like very much. I found the plot devices of escalating tension through the addition of Superintendent Francoeur, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but the superintendent who doesn't like Armand. I found that a bit tenuous. There really was no explanation ever given, or at least a realistic pretext for his descent into the scene or that of his emissary from the Catholic Church, who was part of the Inquisition. I guess all in all, those elements of the story felt disruptive to me. I couldn't suspend disbelief long enough to stay submerged in the story. I also had a hard time with what felt like melodrama in the behavior of Jean Guy. It just seemed a little soap opera-ish. I mean, he kind of acts like a vain jerk. And again, I feel like it's almost a device as a foil to Armand as his father figure, but he really was pretty unlikable the entire book. However, I was still interested in the mystery, real or imagined, surrounding the Gregorian chants of the monastery. I always enjoy kind of the historical tidbits that Louise Penny puts in the books, like the origins of musical notes. Those were originally something called neumes, and again, pronunciation may be all over the place here. But the neumes represent sort of the conductor's arm movements and hand movements. So I'm not mad at the book, but I'm ready for the next one. Once again, I really enjoyed some of the writing and the quotes, and just to give you another one, one of the elders told him that when he was a boy, his grandfather came to him one day and said he had two wolves fighting inside him. One was gray, the other black. The gray one wanted his grandfather to be courageous and patient and kind. The other, the black one, wanted his grandfather to be fearful and cruel. This upset the boy, and he thought about it for a few days and then returned to his grandfather, and he asked, "Grandfather, which one of the wolves will win?" The abbot smiled slightly and examined the chief inspector. Do you know what his grandfather said? Gamache shook his head. "The one I feed," said Dom Philippe. And I feel like that's something that I've read, that parable maybe, somewhere else, but still it was lovely and appropriate in the context of the story. So that's my wrap up for the month of February 2020. What have you been reading? I'd love to know if you have any history with any of the books I mentioned, or if you have any great recommendations. I'd love to hear them. Particularly what you thought of the Testaments if you've read it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it just meh? Let me know. Thanks for watching.